All right, good morning. I'm Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioner's Weekly Meeting for May 14th, 2025. Commissioner Gilman, preliminary remarks. Are you ready to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you here. I would vote to approve the consent agenda.
Commissioner Plant.
Good morning. I would approve the consent agenda as well.
As would I. Thanks to you both. I think we're going to start with a public comment from Ms. Glustrom. Ms. Glustrom, you're up.
Morning, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity. For the record, my name is Leslie Glustrom. I've been an intervener and a participant at the Utilities Commission for over 20 years. And as it turns out, time has indicated that a lot of things I said 15 and 20 years ago have come to pass. So last time we spoke, I spoke about not driving backwards into the future. As you know, I have to find a way to communicate with you in, I don't know, roundabout terms. So today we'll talk about paradigm shifts. And, you know, you all are plenty smart, so I expect you'll be able to grasp the implications. So you may or may not know my background is as a chemist and a biochemist. I have a strong interest in the history of science. And one of the classic books there is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. You know, it's kind of a long book, a little heady, a little philosophical, but it's actually very good. The short version is that when you have a lot of pain points, it's time for a paradigm shift. I don't think I have to remind you that you all are working with an awful lot of pain points in the work you do. And so I would recommend that it's time for a paradigm shift. In science, this has played out in some classic examples. One of the best known is sort of the Copernican revolution. Of course, the church fathers thought that, of course, the earth had to be the center of the earth because we see the sun come up every morning, go down every night. So, of course, the earth is the center and the sun's turning around us. But, of course, the data didn't fit into that. There are an increasing number of pain points from a scientific point of view. Copernicus, Galileo, Brahe, all sort of pointed that out. And, of course, Galileo spent the last 9 years of his life in house imprisonment for being right. And I was thinking this morning, I guess if you want me to go away, you're going to have to put me under house arrest rather than just take away my intervention. But I'm just going to keep showing up.
I don't think we have that authority.
Oh, it's a different country, Mr. Chairman. You can. There is nothing funny about this, of course. But I thought I'd see if I could make you laugh. So another classic example is around plate tectonics, continental drift. And Alfred Wegener said in the early 1900s, you know, there's a ton of evidence that South America and Africa were cheek to jowl, were connected. And everybody thought he was crazy. But of course, in time, he died before he was vindicated. He died in 1930. The Americans were particularly resistant to his theories, and it wasn't until the 1960s that they started to say, you know what, there is so much evidence that we are finally, frankly, gonna fold. And now we all kind of know, yep, there are those supercontinents, and yep, all those southern continents were all together, and the evidence is cool and awesome and exciting. But, you know, he was thought to be, as they call it, on the lunatic fringe, but he was actually right. And in my own field of biochemistry, you may or may not know that if you had gone into a scientific meeting in the first half of the 20th century, anytime before about 1950, and said, you know, I think the genetic material is DNA, you would have been laughed out of the room and wouldn't have been allowed entrance. You would have had your intervention denied because everybody knew that with only 4 bases, how could DNA be the genetic material? And then O.T. Avery, the guy who did some of the first really clear experiments, was like, I am sure of this, but I don't dare say anything because I'll be put under house arrest or some such thing. But of course, he was vindicated over time too. And now we all know, oh, it's 3 bases per amino acid, and the whole code works out. And, you know, everything we do now is based on that. The quantum revolution was the same, but we'll spare all that for the time being. And I would just ask you to think about the fact that you are also experiencing a lot of pain points. And it's time to shift the paradigm from the 20th century paradigm to a 21st century paradigm. That as long as we continue to do what we did in the 20th century, which is to put the generation a long ways away from load, we're going to be seeing the things that you have just been clearly informed about, which is it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work already, and it will work a lot less as we go forward in this century. So we've got to do everything we can to get generation and storage as close to load as possible. And importantly, in science, when you take 200 years, as the Catholic Church did, to recognize that, oh, maybe the Earth isn't the center of the universe, and 200 years before you quit banning the books, that's a sad piece of history. But in your work, what happens is we make really expensive mistakes. I've watched my state make really expensive mistakes, and I'm praying that we don't continue to make them. Real people pay for these. As you know, we have over $1 billion of stranded coal assets. And I and hundreds of others, we weren't the ones that were paid to participate at the commission, but we had it right. And you can go back and look at the public hearings from any of those proceedings, and you'll see all of the parties were wrong and the citizens were right. So I would ask as you go forward that, again, don't drive backwards in the future. I would hope you would literally spin your chair around and try to both think backwards how fast things evolve. 20 years ago, we didn't have iPhones. 40 years ago, we didn't have personal computers. And then think about the depreciation period. Transmission's often 60 to 80 years. Will this investment hold up? And if you're honest about it, and try to envision what the extreme weather is going to be like. We just heard about the flood in Maryland yesterday, where like all of a sudden the school is filled up to the first floor with water. They're like, oh, how did this happen? You know, we're going to just see so much of that. So I'd ask you to spin your chairs around, look forward into the future, close your eyes, try to envision, think about whether the investments you're making are going to stand the test of time. And as long as they're made within the 20th century paradigm, the answer is going to be no. So I get that we don't get to snap our fingers and go there, but to the extent I appreciate the progress you've all made already. You know, kudos to you. But we've got to go faster, and I can't, you know, we have to spend some money keeping the old system going, but I would ask that you try to balance it by ensuring that we spend more money on a 21st century paradigm, getting generation storage as close to load as possible, more expensive up front, likely to work much better in the long run. So again, I always appreciate your time. I appreciate all three of you. I tell everyone we have, you know, great commissioners. I don't happen to believe even with great commissioners that regulation can supplant competition. But for today, I would just ask you to, again, spin your chairs around, look forward into the future, and really ask yourself the hard questions about whether the billions of dollars you're being asked to spend will stand the test of time. And as always, appreciate this opportunity and appreciate your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Glustrom, and that's actually not a bad frame for the conversation we may have today. The first item on the agenda is Ms. O'Neill, follow-up on the Commission's investigation into outages and some of the customer service issues. So take us away, Ms. O'Neill.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Erin O'Neill of your Fixed Utilities staff. With me today, I also have Nick Bongiardina of your Fixed Utilities Engineering staff and Tamar Moss of your Research and Emerging Issues staff to help me field any questions you might have. We're here this morning to discuss possible next steps from staff's investigation into the increased outages on the Public Service Company of Colorado electric system in 2024 and from the investigation into public services customer care issues over that same period of time. On September 16, 2024, the Commission issued decision number C-24-0668, opening proceeding number 24I-0394E, which was in the matter of the investigation into recent outages on the Public Service Company of Colorado electric system. On April 30, 2025, staff of the Commission provided two presentations at the Commission's weekly meeting. First, investigation into recent outages on the Public Service, or also known as Xcel Energy electric system, and investigation into customer care and billing issues for Public Service Company of Colorado. The second of these presentations was not specifically in response to that formal outage investigation, but was part of a separate investigatory audit conducted by Commission staff. These presentations detailed significant declines in the service provided by public service, primarily in the calendar year 2024, across multiple areas, including system reliability, customer support, and billing. Those presentations were informational, and while they contained some potential recommendations for future action, no specific Commission decisions or actions were taken at that time. Rather, the Commission directed Commission staff to bring the matters back to the Commission at a later Commissioners' Weekly meeting, such as today, for further discussion and consideration of next steps. On May 9th, 2025, Public Service filed a letter in response to the staff's presentation titled Fiasco Response to Outage and Billing Challenges. For our discussion today, I plan to present a summary of the company's responses to the staff's investigation thus far, a discussion of the possibility of the Commission opening a miscellaneous proceeding to institute some regular reporting requirements, and then if the Commission is interested in pursuing an M-docket, I'll step through 6 specific areas of potential inquiry and tracking for your consideration. So starting with a sort of, brief summary, and I think you all have the initial comments that the company provided, but I'll start with a brief overview of the company's comments in response to staff's presentation. The company's letter in response to the presentations did not dispute any of the data or analysis provided by staff. The company states, quote, overall, the company agrees with much of the objective data provided by staff, and yet the company finds it is important to provide more context around the data, as well as ensure the Commission is aware of internal practice and proactive improvements that have been put into place to address the issues raised. The company acknowledged the significant customer service issues in 2024, stating, quote, the company recognizes that performance in 2024 on electrical reliability and on customer service faced challenges, and we apologize to all impacted customers and reaffirm our commitment to do better. For each of the 3 areas of concern, reliability, customer care, and billing, the company provided an explanation of contributing factors and a discussion of actions that the company has already taken to address the concern. I'm going to step through each one of those areas and just provide you some. There's more detail in the letter, but just to provide some of that context. Regarding system reliability, the company explained that its SAIDI metric, which is System Average Interruption Duration Index, which is the broadest metric of system reliability, that metric was 352 minutes in 2024, while the national average in 2023 was roughly 367 minutes, so fairly similar. This put the company in the top half of the utilities in 2024. However, the company notes that the average SAIDI for the last 10 years was 138 minutes. And the company states, quote, this result underscores that the company's overall reliability performance in recent years has been strong and that 2024 was indeed challenging. The company identified specific issues making 2024 a particularly challenging year, including abnormal levels of storm and extreme weather, increased planned outages that were, quote, necessitated by system improvement work for wildfire risk mitigation, and outages on feeders associated with the activation of wildfire system operations to reduce the risk of wildfires to protect public safety. The company identified steps it has already taken to begin to address these reliability issues. Some of these steps relate to the company's pending wildfire mitigation plan, and I will not provide detailed comments on those since that is a pending litigated proceeding in front of the Commission. The company further stated that, quote, the vast majority of the lowest performing feeders, 12 of the 15, identified by staff, are also targeted for inclusion in the company's Feeder Performance Improvement Plans, or FPIP. New acronym for me. It's always a good day when I get a new acronym. Sorry.
Or a bad day.
Bad day, right. Sorry. So those are included in the company's Feeder Performance Improvement Plan for identifying and implementing corrective actions to mitigate reliability concerns in 2025. And further states, the combination of these efforts has already led the company to make significant upgrades over the last year to improve the results on these 15 lowest performing feeders. The collective outage duration of these 15 feeders in the first 4 months of 2025 are down 93% from 2024. The company also provides some commentary on the South Broadway feeder that had been identified as particularly problematic. The company states, with respect to the specific South Broadway feeder identified in staff's analysis, we made distribution upgrades in August 2024 to reduce outages affecting our customers in this area, which included replacing broken equipment and adding wildfire protection on our infrastructure. Those upgrades reduced the number of outages, including those caused by animals that were the source of many of the outages impacting customers in 2024. The company states that Quote, the company's corrective actions in tandem with fewer major event days so far this year have led to average outage durations in the first 4 months of 2025 that are even lower than the company's strong performance levels during the 2014 to 2023 period. Regarding billing issues, the company identified 2 specific issues making 2024 a particularly challenging year for billing. First, the company was continuing rollout of advanced metering infrastructure, or AMI, for residential customers, which increased manual meter reading and field errors. And second, the company contracted its billing department functions to IBM in 2024 to quote, take advantage of the efficiencies that a large technology company could offer. The company states that while it spent a significant amount of time preparing for this transition, there were unexpected challenges around the increased workload coming from the AMI deployment, and more significant training was required for contracted billing staff. The company identified steps it has already taken to begin to address billing issues, including corrective actions with the vendor undertaking this meter installation work to avoid the need for manual corrections, increased billing team staffing, and the implementation of additional billing training for customer contact agents. Regarding the customer care issues, the company states that it had difficulty in maintaining staffing levels at customer care centers in 2024. Specifically, the company states that, quote, in 2023, the company began experiencing higher than normal attrition levels for customer contact center agents, which also coincided with increased difficulty in hiring new agents at levels that were sufficient to maintain existing staffing levels. The company identified steps it has already taken to begin to address billing issues, including hiring, quote, approximately 170 agents over the last 6 months and planning to hire approximately 90 more agents in the next 2 months, bringing staffing levels back to the levels of early 2023 when there were approximately 356 customer contact center agents. The company further states that, quote, with these increased staffing levels and thus increased capacity to respond to and assist with customer inquiries through all types of events, as of February 2025, the company discontinued the use of auto disconnection of non-emergency customer calls during periods of high call volume. That concludes my summary. I can pause here if you have any questions or comments on the letter, or we can move to the discussion of potential next steps for the Commission.
No, I just say I appreciate the company taking responsibility for its customer service and other problems, offering an apology to its impacted customers, describing recent progress, and committing to do better going forward. I also found the additional context in the following useful, and I'll have more comments at the end on some of the specifics. But Commissioner Gilman, any comments?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Ms. O'Neill, and I generally agree with your comments, but happy to move on to your recommendation and discussion on next steps.
Commissioner Plant?
Yep, same.
Okay. So as mentioned previously, after staff's presentations 2 weeks ago, the Commission requested that staff bring the matters back to the Commission for further discussion. At this time, staff and the Commission have not had sufficient time to discuss all potential long-term steps, such as emergency or other rulemakings, or to discuss the scope of such potential actions. However, as an intermediate step in advance of such long-term actions, staff suggests the Commission might consider opening a miscellaneous or M docket for the purposes of further data collection, baselining, tracking progress, setting forth Commission expectations about adequacy of service, and providing transparency to the public. Some of the reporting discussed below is also tracked in the company's quality of service plan, and the QSPA also includes some detailed reporting that's not on this list of metrics that will be discussed here today. This MDOC reporting is different from the QSP in that it would provide additional reporting on certain customer service metrics, would be more frequent and timely, would set forth Commission performance expectations, and would not adjust for exclusion factors, which many of the QSP metrics are adjusted for exclusions. Staff suggests that the Commission consider opening an M docket to require quarterly reporting for public service in 6 specific areas: auto disconnections, monthly billing, staffing levels, customer care responsiveness, response to PUC consumer affairs, and outage logging. I can pause here to make a recommendation specifically on the M docket and potentially take a vote on that, or I can proceed to the more detailed recommendations and discussion of exactly what information staff proposes might be included in such.
I think we can go through the detail.
Okay. So this information, staff would suggest that it be broken down by month but reported on a quarterly basis. So the first area for specific, potential specific reporting requirements is on auto disconnection of customer calls. And if we recall from the previous presentation, the company auto disconnected over 100,000 customers in 2024. Staff suggests the Commission consider reporting that would include the total number of outage disconnections by month, total number of calls abandoned by customers, and that the Commission, or that the and the third, company's already articulated its intent to discontinue auto disconnection of customer calls, so the Commission could communicate its expectation that the company make progress on this commitment and use the M-docket to track that progress. The second area would be monthly billing. If you recall that the number of customers that simply are not receiving a monthly bill increased by approximately 240% between 2020 and 2024. Reporting in this area could include number of customers not receiving bills each month by customer class, the breakdown of root causes of the lack of billing, progress towards resolution of root causes, average time to resolve non-billing issues, average cumulative customer bill after resolution of non-billing, and the process for communicating with customers regarding these billing issues. Given that the company's tariff at sheet R35 states that, quote, bills for service shall be rendered monthly, the Commission could communicate its expectation that the company work to reduce the non-billing issues and that the company should communicate with customers about any billing delays. The third area...
Before you go on, can I just say, as part of that expectation, can we also ask the company to provide real-time notice that the bill is delayed? So if they're not getting a monthly bill, I would expect that the company would communicate that back to the customer. And also on the auto disconnect, I wasn't sure about the exact expectation, but I think there should be an expectation that customers could leave a message. I think you were headed that way, but I wasn't positive. So, I mean, oh, did we lose our feed? All right. All right, let's keep going. So I just request we be really clear about our expectations. So keep going, number 3.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Chairman, and I think it's sort of part of each of these, setting an expectation and potentially tracking progress towards that expectation makes sense as a.
And if you have a suggested timeline for that progress, I wouldn't mind seeing it as part of the M-docket order, assuming we do that.
Yeah, I agree. Agree. I think I'll have to think about that and maybe bring that back. But yes. All right. So, and I apologize. I can pause after each one just to see if there's any feedback, and we can discuss more at the end.
You can keep going. We'll interrupt.
All right. Sounds great. So the third area for reporting would be on the staffing levels. And recall that the company reduced staffing in its customer care contact center and shifted to contracting for most of its outside contracting for most of its billing functions. Reporting in this area could include headcount in the following departments: customer care, billing, and distribution maintenance. The distribution maintenance is a little bit more related to the outages, but I think if we're asking for reporting regarding staffing levels, that's an area that we could potentially include as well. Also reporting around the breakdown of internal versus external headcount by department, and explanation of how these functions are allocated between the holding company and public service to the extent that that's relevant. Given the company's stated intent to increase staffing in the customer care center, the Commission could use the M-docket to track the progress towards the company's staffing targets. And as you indicated, Chairman, perhaps try to put out an expectation for when staffing levels would be back to sort of 2023 levels.
And appreciate you flagging the relationship between the holding company and the operating company. I was confused about which functions are located where.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that the customer contact center in particular is a holding company level. So I think that is part of the issue, is that it may be that somebody calls and gets a sort of, we're too busy to talk to you today on a bright, sunny, beautiful day when it looks like nothing is happening in Colorado, but there's significant weather happening in Minnesota or other parts of the country, drawing a lot of the customer contact folks. Anyway, sorry, the fourth area for reporting would be on sort of general customer care responsiveness. Recall that the company's average call response time for 2024 was 452 seconds, while the company's QSP sort of target is 70-second call response time, so significantly shorter. Reporting in this area could include average call response time experienced, total number of customer complaints received and handled by agents versus interactive voice response versus email, website complaints, general tracking of the number of complaints, average time to resolve complaints by category. And again, the company's QSP sets an expectation for call response time of 70 seconds. The MDocket could track the company's progress in restoring the call response time to 70 seconds for the majority of the company's calls. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'm being corrected in real time. Sorry. The target is 45 seconds for 70% of the customer's calls. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Good clarification. Yes, the target is 45 seconds. All right. So the fifth area for reporting would be responsiveness to PUC consumer affairs. And if you recall from the presentation, PUC Consumer Affairs reported an almost 50% increase in the number of complaints that we receive between 2024 compared to 2024 compared to 2022. Reporting in this area could include the number of complaints that were received, elevated from PUC Consumer Affairs, the average time to respond to PUC Consumer Affairs, and the average time to resolution of those concerns. Commission Rule 1301C states that if the Commission staff refers an informal complaint to a regulated entity for a response, the regulated entity shall respond in writing within 14 days of the referral or such lesser period as Commission staff may require. The MDocket could track the average time it takes for the company to respond to PUC Consumer Affairs and also set an expectation that such a response should include a substantive resolution of the issues that are raised. And then the last area for reporting is a little bit more detailed because this is related to the company's logging of outage events. And this logging is pursuant to Rule 3203. Staff identified 5 categories of information that should be included in the company's outage log going forward. Given the nature of the company's outage log, these requirements are just, again, a little bit more specific and detailed. But the first would be to add a census block group GeoID to group outages on feeders that span more than one census block group. To add granularity to the outage log and enable additional levels of analysis that were not possible in staff's outage investigation. For instance, it would facilitate independent analysis of outages in disproportionately impacted communities and would further enable staff to independently identify high concentrations of outages in smaller geographic areas that feeder-level analysis cannot locate. The second area on outage logging would be to include IEEE 1366 OPCO level reporting, which is the system level major events designation. The company provided this information during the investigation, and it would be helpful to have that as a permanent component of the outage log. Similarly, we recommend inclusion of IEEE 1366 region level reporting. Similarly, that's a sort of regional level major event designation. Again, company provided this information, and staff suggests to make that a permanent part of the log. Staff also suggests including an EPSS flag to indicate whether the EPSS was used during any given outage. EPSS is Enhanced Powerline Safety Settings. See, so many new acronyms we get to try to nail down. Not all feeders are equipped with EPSS, so this category would only apply to those specific feeders, but it would help staff have the information to track when those system operations are being implemented. And then similarly, we recommend including a flag for wildfire system operations so that we can track, when those are overlapping with system outages. In addition to these specific data logging issues, staff believes it would be helpful for the company to include information about the categorization of outages and to log any changes in the categorization process for outages and log any changes in the definitions of the outage categories. So there was some struggle with those categories changing over time and it not being clear how those categorizations had changed. So we recommend including that qualitative information in the log as well. And similarly, the company should provide discussion of the unknown category. Again, recall that was a large category of the outages were logged as unknown, and staff suggests the company could provide more commentary on when things are categorized as unknown and work towards minimizing the number of outages that are categorized that way. The company discussed that its lowest performing feeders were generally included in the company's Feeder Performance Improvement Plan, my acronym from earlier. The Commission could direct the company to provide more granular reporting on these 15 worst feeders, what upgrades have been completed, and the outage results. Staff also recommends additional reporting on the 15 worst census block group segments in order to capture the performance of feeder sections like the South Broadway Denver metro business area that was problematic in 2024. In addition, the Commission could direct the company to identify how the work performed on these problematic feeders and segments relates to the projects included in the company's transmission cost adjustment distribution rider, which is new for this year. So I'll pause here, or I can go to my recommendation, and happy to discuss any of these potential reporting.
I'm ready for the recommendation, but Commissioner Gilman, any comments or thoughts or?
Maybe I do have just two questions for you. With regard to customer care, it strikes me it's not only important how quickly they answer the phone, which would clearly reduce, people quitting halfway through the process here, but also their ability to actually resolve a complaint in fewer touch points, fewer reaches out, right? We somewhat regularly receive communication from frustrated customers who will say, I have tried, I have called, I talked to this person, then I talked to this person, then this person emailed me. And so it seems to me that is another important metric. I'll leave it to you to figure out, what is the exact ask here? Obviously, the duration of time, of real time, it was X weeks or whatever to resolve a complaint is one thing, but how hard is the customer having to work to get something resolved? We've had people say this is like a part-time job, getting them to fix my billing. And I keep reaching out, and they keep saying they're going to disconnect me because we can't break through to someone who can answer the question, someone who can solve the problem. So to me, that's part of the customer care thing. It's just how quick are they answering the phone, but do we have people who are knowledgeable enough and empowered to solve the problems who are answering the phone, so we're not torturing people through them having to continue to advocate for themselves. So that's one point. With regard to the logging of outage events, I just wonder, and I'll kind of leave this one to you as well, with regard to more granularity locationally, and probably with some other aspects on the outage logging, it strikes me that with full rollout of AMI, we have so much more data available. So it just stands to reason that this should be able to very easily be much more granular in terms of identifying the impacted locations, the timing, and even cause, to a large extent by understanding the exact impacted area, it can very much help identify, the cause that's impacted. So I would say I think it's fair that our expectations are increasing significantly in the granularity and accuracy of how those things are logged, because these customers have paid for the technology that enables that to be better tracked in real time and more accurately. So those are maybe the two kind of additions, changes I would have to your areas if you can figure out how to word some things in there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think those are great calls. I think we've received a number of specific customer complaints regarding that. The first one of it takes many calls to get to a resolution. So I think we can certainly add that. And then, on the, I completely agree. I think the company has the data, and there is a lot more granular data being begun to included in that QSP, but also again capturing that in that log. And I think starting with an M docket and exploring what are all those different issues and working with the company to see what's easier to report and what's the best format for that and how to collect that data will help inform a longer term process. I mean, I think ultimately we would potentially like to get something in rules about how these are logged, but doing this as a test case and going through the process with the M docket to see what works and what's the best granular data as a starting point, I think.
And I just add, if you can also ask a series of questions to figure out how the AMI data interfaces with the ADMS and how it feeds into all of these outages. So, just a series of questions to see if we can better understand how that AMI data is being used. Commissioner Plain.
Yeah, I would agree with the comments of my colleagues. In some ways, I feel like maybe we're kind of playing a game of whack-a-mole and it seems like, you get a complaint and then we open a docket and start to look into that complaint, and then there's another complaint and look into that complaint and try and figure out what we want to get reporting on, which I think is something that we need to do. But I'm wondering if there's, as an M docket, I guess there's a component of this that's going to be focused on reporting and periodic reporting and what's included in a report. But I would be interested in broadening a question within this M docket for any participating parties around what would be good components for customer satisfaction rating. Basically, overall, what we're trying to do is provide people not only with a reliable, resilient service, but one that meets their needs and that makes their lives easier, and that actually provides this service that they can be, that they can enjoy and do it in a seamless way that doesn't cause them consternation. And I'm wondering if there are a variety of different components of that customer satisfaction metric that we should be considering, maybe outside of, when we get a complaint on something, responding to that one complaint, but kind of looking bigger and broader at overall customer satisfaction.
I support that. You want to jump to your...
Oh, wait, I have one more. Sorry. I was wondering, Ms. O'Neill, if we know, does the company track internally issues they're hearing from customer affairs in terms of categorization? We're having more billing issues. We're having more interconnection issues. We're having more, whatever the type of issue is. To Commissioner Plant's point about us playing whack-a-mole, 2 years ago, it was interconnection, not happening on time, and we're understaffed in interconnection, and we need new processes, right? And then a year and a half ago, it was we're getting a lot of complaints from developers and buildings who can't get energized in time, not getting proper response from the company, being told it'll take 3 years and $3 million and causing a lot of frustration. Now it's these issues, and I don't know what causes the change. It seems like we have some fixes here. The company's communicated, but I don't know. Is it coming to us? Is it us doing an investigation? Is it going to the news? Like, what is spurring the action? So it strikes me it would be helpful to understand, are these things the company's even tracking internally to understand when they're seeing an uptrend in certain types of complaints? It would certainly be the most efficient for everyone involved, including the customers, if the company were tracking this and were issue spotting and saying, oh, geez, we just started getting a lot of interconnection complaints. It seems like it's taking a long time. Let's look at the staffing before it ever gets to a PUC investigation and all these extra steps. So maybe we can work that into just understanding internally, what are they doing to track an issue spot when they're seeing an uptick in a certain issue area, because it very much feels like every 6 months it's a new serious issue the customers are dealing with from a customer service and kind of responsiveness point of view. And so I just worry in 6 months down the line it's another thing.
Yeah, and it's concerning that this, wasn't brought to us. It sort of came out of an investigation into outages, and then we find billing problems and customer call handling problems and service problems. So,
yeah, completely, and I can answer part of that. So I think we certainly have audit responses that indicate, yes, that the company does track sort of categorizations. That information wasn't presented as I discussed last time because the audit is confidential, so I wasn't sure what level of sort of detail to provide. But I'm not sure that we didn't ask a lot of questions or follow up on sort of the trending and how the company responds or what it does with that categorization. So I think we can say that, yes, the company is tracking that and can certainly ask more questions and try to better understand how they do that. And then also certainly agree, Chairman, that I think certainly part of staff's concern with all of this is that, we were seeing these issues come to us from customers, not being brought forward or explained from the company, and that was part of the problem.
Unless there's something else you want to jump to your recommendation.
Sure. So staff recommends that the Commission open a repository, M docket, to receive quarterly reporting from public service as described in this discussion. Staff recommends that the Commission require the company to provide detailed reporting starting with the first quarter of 2025, and that first report would be due by the end of May. I think that's right. We're in May now, right? And then provide quarterly reporting for the remaining 3 quarters of 2025 and each quarter of 2026, and that reporting should be provided by the end of the month following the end of the quarter to give them time to assemble the report. Staff recommends that this be a TBC order to make sure all of this information is captured.
And I just add to that, it's to me it's broader than a repository docket. It sets forth a series of expectations about performance. It manages a dialogue among the parties and stakeholders, and it sets forth to the best extent we can timeline. So I'm just reacting to your repository comment. I think your other 5 or 6 recommendations were clear, but just wanted to clarify it's way more than a repository docket.
Agreed. I think this was noticed as sort of in the matter of the Commission examination of electric utility service adequacy. I think the only thing I would add to that is we're recommending that this reporting requirements be required for Public Service Company of Colorado, not recommending this requirement on any other utilities at this. But agree that the intent is to have a broad examination of service adequacy.
I strongly support that. Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree as well.
And I have 2 more. You may have more issues. I have
So I have one more. Staff also recommends the Commission considering closing the I docket. So we've moved to the M docket process now.
And the M docket would take notice of it, or it would be transferred in the report and all the findings?
Correct. Take administrative notice of everything from the I docket within the M docket and close the I docket.
Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I also agree.
As do I. 2 more things for you guys. First, I'd like to ask Council to work with staff to explore emergency rulemaking. I don't know that it makes sense, but I would say the M docket is generally non-binding. I mean, we can certainly put forward our expectations. I don't think we know enough now to make any decisions, but I'd at least like to have that conversation if that would work for both of you.
I mean, I'm certainly not opposed to understanding the parameters better and what could or couldn't be included. I don't think we're at a point where we know exactly what should be included. What is our next step? In part, there's some data collection, but I think also probably a discussion on the bigger picture. You know, as we talked, I think it was also 2 weeks ago about concerns with capital spending and all these things. So I think painting that full vision a little better. So I wouldn't say I'm confident at all in what the emergency rulemaking specifically needs to say to best address this issue. You know, what I want to avoid is like some quick Band-Aid fixes that don't properly holistically look at what's going on. But I'm fine getting more information on like the process and the setup.
That's all. I just want to know what our options are. I think, like you, it's premature to move forward. Commissioner Plant, comments?
Yeah, okay? No, I would support that. I think, isn't an emergency rulemaking kind of a quick Band-Aid fix? That's kind of the definition.
By definition.
It should move you in the right direction, considering, you know, I don't want to do something that forecloses other, better, broader options, I guess.
So we'll do the M docket as a TBC decision. I have one more thing on this, but anything else from your perspective, Ms. O'Neill?
No, I think that gets us what we need. Thank you.
So, like you both, I've been struggling with what's the underlying cause of these customer service problems, and right now have maybe more questions than answers, but I like how you framed it as whack-a-mole and what's going on underneath it, and how you, Commissioner Gilman, broadened out the concern. And I want to start the conversation by following up on something the company said in response to our concern that these customer service problems may have resulted from cuts to O&M spending. More specifically, the company presented in its response 2 graphs showing that O&M spending in Colorado had not been cut since 2020. To better explain my concern and help tee this up for discussion, I wanted to show a couple of other graphs, all from the company, with the first one from March 2023 investor presentation. Can you pull that up, Ms. Kunkel? Number one. And I just say this shows holding company operations and maintenance spending growth of 0.5% from 2014 to 2023, and projects a 2% decline in 2023 to offset an increase in 2022. This slide also highlights that inflation was 2.7%, or over 5 times greater than the growth in O&M spending. So I get it that O&M spending may not have declined in nominal dollars, but at least at the holding company level, it appears to have decreased in real terms for many years, with seemingly some cuts at the holding company level in 2023 before these problems arose in 2024. If you could go to the next slide. This slide is from an Excel March 2024 investor presentation at page 23. This slide shows the percentage change in O&M spending from 2015 to 2022 for 17 peer utilities equivalent to Excel. This slide finds that Excel was the second most aggressive utility among its peers in managing down O&M spending over time, with most utilities showing significant O&M spending increases. Finally, I want to show a third slide from that same March 2024 investor presentation that shows projected rate-based growth of 9% for the holding company and 12% for public service company in Colorado. In essence, capital spending is increasing 5 times faster than inflation, and somewhere between 20 to 25 times faster than O&M spending. So that's a partial basis for my concern that O&M and perhaps capital spending may be driven in part by the company's financial incentives and perhaps not solely by system and customer needs. The incentive that appears to drive these diverse outcomes is likely, or appears to be, that Excel can earn a fixed return on capital investment, but doesn't earn anything on O&M spending. I can't think of any other factor that would explain this large difference in spending growth rates between O&M and capital. Although most investor-owned utilities have similar financial and regulatory arrangements, Excel, especially over the past years, seems to be particularly aggressive in how it spends both capital and O&M in response to these incentives. Finally, despite all this, the incentives surrounding O&M spending likely exist mainly in between rate cases and get zeroed out at the time a rate case is decided. As a result, I propose that we just focus on customer service results going forward, rather than trying to more tightly manage O&M spending levels and incentives. On the capital spending side, however, I think the impact of potentially misaligned regulatory incentives, where utility earnings are directly linked to rate-based growth, whether the capital spending produces corresponding customer benefits, may be more problematic. We'll turn to that maybe in a few minutes in the context of the governor's letter, but I'll stop there and see if you guys have any final comments on the staff investigation or regulatory incentives like this. And maybe go back and leave the second one up for now. Yeah, that's it. So of the 17 utilities, you can see Excel is all the way on the extreme left end, cutting O&M, consistently over many years. So, Commissioner Gilman, thoughts, comments?
Well, thank you for the graphs. I appreciate them. And I think this puts into context what we've been seeing, as I kind of elaborated on before. It's been kind of a laundry list of customer service issues over the past several years. And this certainly puts that into context. And I don't disagree with anything you said in terms of the incentive structure here. Once the O&M kind of costs are set in a rate case, any savings or lack of escalation in those just appears to go directly to the company's bottom line. So, I think it's somewhat obvious that's how the incentive structure is working. I think what will be important is for us to have kind of a more strategic discussion on, is there a different way? Is there a better way we can look at either performance-based regulation or somehow kind of de-emphasizing, the capital motive here to best protect customers, to first of all ensure we have the proper incentives in place to manage down capital spending in the years to come, and to ensure that the company is really providing the customer service that we expect them to be providing for customers.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I'd agree, and I appreciate you bringing this forward. First of all, I want to level set. We want them to be efficient. We want them to be lean. We want them to do. We want them to do things in the most cost-effective way, and I think that should be said. But if you can go to the what was the graph just before this? Nope, the one.
Number one.
Yeah, first one. This is what really kind of strikes me. We're talking about, we're looking at what they're spending on O&M relative to inflation. We've had a huge increase in population in this period of time. Really what we should be looking at is how well they're servicing the customers, and their customer base has been increasing. It's been going up. And you would expect that, again, by doing it efficiently, but you would expect that there would be increasing demands on customer services as their customer base goes up. Certainly, we've seen during this time an incredible explosion in customer-sided resources and interest on the customer side of things to invest in things that are related to the energy transition. I would think that all of those things would put more pressure on their O&M and more pressure on their customer service. And so I think looking at that against declines in O&M is really kind of telling and helps to explain why we're in a situation where people are becoming increasingly frustrated with the services that they're receiving from the utility. And again, I think this goes back to why we really need to find a good way to measure customer satisfaction and to tie that to the earnings of the company, because overall, if they do a good job in providing the service and one that customers are having a positive experience with and able to engage in positively, then that earning is justified. But we want to see them do it efficiently, but we also want to see them do it well.
Agree. Thank you, Ms. O'Neill, and thank you to your team for doing an incredible job on a data-driven investigation. Just really nice work. Proud of what you guys did. So, on behalf of Colorado and the PUC, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
With that, let's move on to the governor's letter. We had an initial conversation last week, but we really didn't have a full opportunity to discuss it, as it was the last item on a packed agenda. And I would just say the incentive concerns that we just discussed around O&M spending and customer service are, I think, even more compelling in this context. So, Director Roy, if you could briefly summarize where we're at to start us off, and appreciate the REI team showing up to answer questions. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Rebecca White with your Director staff. I'm joined here today by two members of the Research and Emerging Issues team. And so they'll be here to answer any questions. But really, my role today is just to preface a continued discussion on really a significant and impressive body of work undertaken by your REI team. Ms. Kunkel, if you could go to the next slide. So just to recap for the commissioners and the listening public, this work started really in October of last year when the PUC, along with many of our sister agencies, received a letter from Governor Polis essentially recommending and laying out a path to look at load growth and its impact on electric rates in a whole new way. And if you go to the next slide, the team that was charged to do this work within the PUC, which is REI, has been hard at work ever since. So we came to you pretty early on after the October letter with some information in November of last year, starting to look at information that we had in some of the filings to look where load growth and rates were headed. On April 30th, the team was back again with some new information, and I think today's discussion is for you to pick back up on that work, which looked both at load growth trends, what we were seeing from California, and really sort of staged the discussion to continue this into the next phase, which would be to bring you all some preliminary work in June, hopefully open that up for public comment and input, and then have a final report in August, which was what the governor's letter asked for. So with that sort of quick framing, I turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, to sort of take it where you'd like, and again, have the REI team here today to help answer any questions.
Greatly appreciated, and again, thanks to this team. Can you turn to slide 13, Ms. Kunkel? And this slide shows public service company in Colorado rate-based growth projections of 16% between 2020 and 2032. It's significantly faster than the rate-based growth that was in California, and it grows our rate base from $8 billion in 2021 to roughly $30 billion in 2028 and over $40 billion in 2032. This just seems like an enormous increase. And if you can go to page 7 now. And this slide, it's based on multiple company filings and ongoing cases, shows very rapid retail sales growth projections over the coming years. As you can see in the first slide, which is the base case, green is history, and the gray, orange, and blue combined are the forecast. As you can see, growth is forecasted to be 10 to 20 times greater in this base case than historical rates, with retail sales projected to more than double by 2034. Can you go to page 8? I think it's the next slide. And this basically shows retail rates on the left axis with time on the horizontal axis. And this is the heart of the concern. I'm worried about the potential long-term rate impacts if capital spending continues to increase and the sales and revenue growth doesn't materialize. The green, blue, and red lines are from an Excel filing in another proceeding. The gray line represents rates escalated at inflation, and the yellow line shows what happens if capital spending is not reduced, as it is in the Excel cases, and the sales growth doesn't occur. In this graph, these lines, particularly the green and yellow, show substantial adverse long-term rate impacts if capital spending isn't tightly managed and the sales growth doesn't materialize as projected. And this risk of slower than forecasted sales growth or of bringing data centers online that don't fully cover the costs that they impose on the system seems to be almost entirely on customers. Finally, if we can go to page 12, this shows a California example with a line being retail rate, the bars being rate base for Pacific Gas and Electric, one of 3 California IOUs that the team examined. And basically, this shows that current rates for PG&E are over 45 cents a kilowatt hour and on a rapid upward trajectory. Given the comparative growth in capital spending and rate base between Colorado and California, I'm concerned that Colorado may be starting down this same path. More broadly, I think there may be capital light approaches to building out clean energy in Colorado that could result in lower rates. For example, as the governor's letter outlines at page 5, we could explore locating large loads by the clean energy resources in southern or eastern Colorado to potentially lower the need for new transmission investment, at least as compared to siting large loads in Denver. Likewise, as we discussed before, we should look closely at putting new storage in the transmission and distribution constrained Denver metro area in ways that help manage down T&D investment. Finally, perhaps our customer programs involving EVs, demand response, distributed generation, beneficial electrification, and various pricing could be significantly better designed to lower peak demand, the peak demand growth that appears to be driving these new capital needs. In all these instances, I'm concerned that the company's incentive to spend capital may disincentivize it from pursuing approaches that might reduce this new capital spending. So I have a couple suggestions about potential ways forward, but just wanted to see if you guys share these concerns and start a dialogue here and then maybe broaden it. So Commissioner Gilman, thoughts?
Yes, thank you for that. Maybe just some initial thoughts and then happy to have a discussion. You know, I think in doing this job and looking at all the forecasts, where all the infrastructure needs to go, it's fair to say there's risks in each direction, right? If we don't build it out in time, you risk not being able to build the housing, being able to fuel our local economy, being able to electrify loads. And at the same time, if we spend far more than we need to achieve all those things, you risk all those priorities anyway by making it really unattractive. And so our job is to balance these risks, kind of pick the least risky and least bad option as we go forward. And so I think the problem we're seeing in balancing that is it appears increasingly that all of the benefits are being stacked to flow to the company given any scenario, and that the vast majority, if not all of the risk, appears to be on the customers. And so that's, I think, the piece we really need to address. And, you know, how do we better reshuffle kind of the risk-reward situation here to ensure that we are absolutely optimizing every dollar that Colorado customers are being asked to pay, and that if Colorado customers are being asked to take a gamble, that risk is shared, you know, and that this incentive and kind of risk structure works. And I think, you know, what I'm hearing from the three of us and what I'm feeling is increasing concern that we're not there in that balance. And, you know, as evidenced kind of by the prior discussion too, that some of the cuts appear to go to things that adversely impact the customer's experience, despite all of the money looking at being spent. And so I think our conversation really needs to center around how do we make sure that risk-reward kind of structure is properly designed. And I have a lot of doubts that the current structure, without any modifications, will get us there. And I think we're kind of really seeing the concerns of that all out in each of these discussions.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, you know, I'm struck by kind of how this whole dynamic has sort of changed over time. You know, traditionally what's happened is that the utilities will project, you know, high growth and you know, that obviously contributes to the amount that they invest in capital infrastructure. But we've historically seen that growth be pretty flat. And that's been seen as a success because, you know, things are being done more efficiently. You know, our equipment is more efficient. The way people use it is more efficient. We have technology that helps to contribute to that efficiency. And so we've seen generally pretty flat growth. And here we are in a kind of a weird situation where we almost are looking at these graphs and hoping for big growth. And it's kind of backwards to the way that we've always sort of planned our systems. And, you know, I think that, you know, part of that comes down to this risk sort of profile that Commissioner Gilman just laid out. I mean, we look at the capital proposal for build, and we look at those graphs and we say, well, the only way we can keep this to inflation is to have a whole bunch of load growth. and that risk of not getting that load growth then falls on the customer. And it's sort of like, you know, kind of wonder if our assumptions are all exactly aligned in terms of what, number one, what the future is going to hold, but also who bears the responsibility for some of those costs. Right now, it seems to all be falling in one place on the customer, and that puts all the risk on the customer.
Well, I'll just throw out 2 or 3 ideas for maybe a path forward. First, I'd like to explore alternative rate-making structures that may better align utility and customer incentives, especially where the company bears the risk, or at least part of the risk, of lower than expected revenue and sales growth, not just putting it all on customers. Perhaps there is a way future rates, we could set future rates based on the company's assumed retail sales projections, and, you know, and start moving away from most of the adjustment clauses. You know, if sales are higher than expected, the company would do better than forecast, and if they were lower, that risk would be shared with customers. Second, I'm thinking we should investigate national best practice for ensuring that large new loads benefit all customers. More specifically, I'd like to better quantify the benefits and costs of locating large loads and storage both within and outside the transmission and distribution constrained Denver metro area. Some of that work is already underway in ongoing proceedings, but perhaps we can more proactively develop proposals to make sure that large loads are brought online in ways that benefit all customers. Finally, I'd like to explore best practice for designing customer incentive programs involving demand response, distributed generation, EVs, beneficial electrification, and pricing in ways that focus more on reducing peak demand by location and start to move away from more energy-oriented approaches that may be reducing usage when we might be otherwise curtailing renewable generation. So those are some very initial rough thoughts. And Commissioner Gilman, thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first is probably the biggest, kind of biting the whole apple, or I don't know, I made that up. I don't even think that's a thing. But
Whack-a-moles with apples.
Something. I think that's probably the biggest one to look at. And I think, you know, look, we've talked about performance-based regulation for several years. We have many different PIMs in place, or performance incentive mechanisms. But those are largely targeted at, like, we've already resigned to the fact that we're spending a bunch of capital on X, so make sure it's not way more than you said. That doesn't 100% do the job of limiting the capital, right? It stops the bleeding once you already know you need more stuff. But I think part of this discussion is how do we really incentivize optimizing that from the start, which, like, what we're doing right now hasn't entirely done. And so I think we really, as part of this, need to look at how do we really better embrace performance-based rate making for some of the high-line priorities here. I mean, clearly customer service, reliability, environmental performance, safety, like what are the core functions we're expecting here, and have some pretty significant expectations without a million carve-outs and exceptions and things. And, like, this is fairly simple. Let's deliver this performance. And that has to find its way much more meaningfully into the rate-making process rather than just strictly cost of capital, rate-based rate-making, in order, I think, for those things to get the attention that we're all feeling like they deserve, to de-emphasize the capital spending piece of how we make money and emphasize serving customers better. And so I think that's something we really need to focus on and highlighting, okay, what are those things? What are those high-level priorities? Don't overcomplicate it. And let's set, minimum thresholds and performance standards there that can then be part of the influence in a rate making process in a more substantial way than we've considered before.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And as you mentioned, the data center piece is a big piece of it. I think 70% of the projected load from the JTS was data centers. So how we address that data center question, and who pays and who assumes the risk on that is a big part of this question. But the other thing, when we were talking about, load growth, some of that load growth is stuff that we want to have happen. I mean, we're looking at EVs, and, that is a new, it's not just an efficient, like a heat pump would be an efficient way to heat and cool your home, but it's a complete switch, from gasoline to the electric system. And so that's going to be a straight up increase in load. But when we look at 5% of that EV charging being managed, that's not performance. That's we want to have that accomplishment of getting those EVs on the system and connected for the emissions benefits, but we also want to have them, work in the system in the most efficient way possible. And so when we look at the load that comes from that EV growth and say, well, we're only going to be able to manage 5% of it, that's I think a real big problem. And so measuring how, when we bring on, and I think this is kind of what you were getting at, both of you actually in your comments, is like when we're bringing on that load, how that is interfacing with the overall operation of the system, the overall load factor of the distribution system, the overall incorporation into what generation we have on the bulk system. All those things sort of work in tandem. And if we only look at one piece of it, how many EVs are getting connected or how many heat pumps are getting connected, then we're missing the bigger picture of how they integrate with the overall system.
I'd just say it seems like in every major case we've seen over the past years, the companies coming in with high capital budgets, the parties want low capital budget, or the customer interests want low capital budgets, and the commission is now in the business increasingly of setting capital budgets. And somehow we have to find a way to have the company be a partner, through aligning incentives. So it's just, I don't know, Colorado's been a light touch regulatory state, and we're being placed in a really difficult position. So,
yeah, I would say I don't disagree with the other two items, the data center and the best practice for demand response. I think in part those are subparts to the first one, right? The first one is, do we have the right incentive structure? And if we don't, how do we set their priorities and integrate real performance-based regulation into rate making? To me, like, that's the high level. If you're doing that right, the other two are ideally naturally incentivized, right? Like good demand response and then optimizing, minimizing costs of new loads. And obviously, optimizing, minimizing infrastructure to add them, optimizing load factor, making sure they don't harm the environmental goals, like all those things should fall out of that. I think it's probably likely those are the two largest, like, sub-bullets right now in terms of opportunities. So, yeah, I don't disagree with those, but I think they fall under the heading of the first, which is the incentive structure appears to need some work, and it needs to be something, that we need to focus on in the coming months.
Final thoughts, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of, how the state at the beginning of, when renewables were coming into the state, really focused on a renewable portfolio standard, which focused on the inputs, right? Because we needed to incentivize this new technology that was coming onto the system. And so we focused on the actual technology. We focused on the inputs into the system. And then that shifted to an emissions-based system where we're no longer saying this percentage of renewables, we're saying this percentage of emissions. We're looking at the outputs of the system. And I think that recognizes a maturity on the part of the renewable industry and really allows us to look at a much broader panoply of inputs that go into the system in order to reduce emissions overall. And I think that's kind of where we are getting to in the technologies that we've been talking about, whether it's heat pumps and EVs and things like that. At first, it was sort of like, how do we get that industry established? How do we get people who install these things to be familiar with all the various different technologies? How do we get people who are considering these things to get familiar with those technologies? And I think we're at a point now where we're starting to shift our focus to the outputs and say, okay, those things are going. They're not, obviously where we want to be totally yet, but they're moving. There's some momentum there. So how do we then look at the outputs to the system, and how do we incentivize those outputs as opposed to just how many did you install?
Well, if you guys can take this conversation, see if you can integrate it in our report back to the governor, and it sounds like we got some work in the coming months to start seeing if we can figure out what other states are doing and how we can move forward in Colorado. So, Director White, thanks to you and the REI team, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue, and hopefully you can take what we did this conversation, which appreciate both of you engaging in this, and see where we go from here. So,
thank you all. A great discussion, and just to close out the fruit metaphor, this is a very big apple. But this team...
Don't forget whacking the ball.
Yeah. But I think the team looks forward to coming back in just about a month with an update on the work. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. Mr. Davis, proceeding number 24R-0168 EG, rules governing rate case proceedings and filings from Senate Bill 23-291.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ron Davis of the Commission's advisory staff. At last week's business meeting, the Commissioners began taking up exceptions to decision number R25-215. That was issued by ALJ Garvey to implement certain rate case-related provisions in Senate Bill 23-291. Based on the discussions last week, 3 issues were identified for additional discussion today as the Commission fully adopts a decision promulgating rules in accordance with the new statute. I'll move through those 3 issues now, unless the Commissioners want to begin the discussion today some other way.
Nope, that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
The first issue returning for discussion relates to the provisions in SB 291 that prohibit utilities from recovering certain types of costs through rates. Section 43-114-2 is a new statute that prohibits utilities from recovering several types of expenses from ratepayers. And the new law also requires the Commission to cause each utility to file an annual report to ensure utilities compliance. As I explained last week, the recommended decision fundamentally concludes that base rates proceedings are where the Commission and interested parties should prevent the recovery of prohibited costs and rates. It then explains that Public Service's recent gas rate case, proceeding number 24AL0049G, supports the conclusion that the annual reports contemplated by SB 291 can address the Commission's findings, conclusions, and directives regarding prohibited costs to properly ensure compliance with the statute. Commissioner Gilman proposed that if EPI's and UCA's exceptions to modify the reporting rule in paragraph 3351 and 4351B is denied, and the annual reporting rule therefore remains as set forth in the rules attached to the recommended decision, an additional rule should be adopted that specifies what information on prohibited expenses must be presented in a rate case proceeding. So to facilitate today's discussion, on that proposal, advisors and council crafted and circulated rule language for the commissioners to consider and to modify if necessary along the lines discussed by Commissioner Gilman. The proposed new rule would follow the paragraph 3351, 4351A that was adopted by the ALJ. That rule simply identifies the prohibited expenses as specified in Senate Bill 291. This new rule would then precede the annual reporting rule recommended by the ALJ that would go unmodified. So this would be a new rule, a new paragraph, 3351, 4351B, that would require the utility to provide in any rate case, at minimum, certain information to enable a determination by the Commission that the utility is not seeking to recover from its customers any of those prohibited costs. This minimum presentation would be disaggregated data that identifies the portion of total annual compensation excluded from cost recovery for each individual employee identified at least by position and title who conducted activities during the applicable test year that are prohibited for recovery. And there would be similar disaggregated data aggregated data that relates to outside vendors, such as consultants and legal counsel, for those same prohibited activities during the same applicable test year.
Commissioner Gilman, have you changed your mind?
No, thanks, Mr. Davis. Appreciate your work on this in the interim, and I think this solves the issue I was looking at. You know, it seemed like we had already determined we're going to have data in rate cases to show compliance with this. And I think this properly strikes the balance rather than an annual reporting, which, look, the utilities may well be having to track this internally annually anyway. But the real use of this is in a rate case in whatever the test year is, you know, or the most recent year, to look at these expenses. And I think it is far better for us, for the parties, for the utilities themselves, for us to explicitly say, you are going to have to make a showing in a rate case. We already know that. So here's what, you know, I think is reasonable for us to communicate, would be the expectation for what the showing is in a rate case. So I think this solves the issue. And, you know, I had some doubts based on some of the comments within the record that the utilities were going to be prepared to do this. So I think this is a much more clear communication such that we don't end up with kind of a mess later or major disallowances or trying to figure out how to unwind this. I think clearly communicating our expectation for what a showing would look like is the cleanest way to do this. So I would recommend we go with Mr. Davis's suggested edits here.
Commissioner Plant? I would agree. As would I.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item. And this relates to how Senate Bill 291 now requires the utilities to provide what is called a rate trend report when it files a request to increase any rate charge or fee. The recommended decision adopts paragraph 3109, 4109C, where, based on the specific requirements of the statute, the utility must include a chart, graph, or other visualization demonstrating each of the utility's rates, charges, fees for the 10 years prior to the date of the utility filing, and the rules attached to the recommended decision also require, if necessary, another chart, graph, or visualization demonstrating all of the utility bill line items for the prior 10 years for each of the utility's customer classes. Last week, Commissioner Plant suggested that these charts, graphs, or other visualizations also include a representation of what total rates would have been if they had increased at the rate of inflation during the preceding 10 years. Advisors and council again crafted and circulated rule language for the commissioners to consider and modify as necessary along the lines discussed by Commissioner Plant.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I think that the language that that was proposed by the staff advisors is gets at what I was trying to get to, which is just putting. I mean, it seems hard to say how this is so difficult, but just put a line on there that shows your total rate over time, how that compares to a CPI, just so that people have a context within which to understand their rates going up or not going up or whatever they're doing, but how it relates to the overall increase in costs over time for everything else.
Commissioner Goman?
Yeah, I agree.
As do I.
Okay, and then the third issue, returning for some more discussion, is Rule 3353, 4353, that if it had been adopted by the LJ, would address certain rate case procedures. As explained in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, Senate Bill 291 states that when promulgating the rules to implement the rate case-related provisions in the statute, the Commission must consider whether certain information in a base rate proceeding must be disclosed to interveners or to the Commission for the purpose of reducing time and costs associated with a lengthy discovery process. Proposed paragraphs 3353D and 4353D in the NOPR listed several required disclosures based in part on the feedback from the stakeholder outreach conducted before this rulemaking and the examples listed in the statute. The commissioners also solicited further suggestions for other types of required disclosures with recommendations on whether the disclosure should be accomplished by a filing into the case or instead through the discovery process only to the parties in the proceeding. And last week, Chair Blank suggested that the Commission uphold the ALJ's decision not to adopt the bulk of Rule 3353, 4353 as proposed in the NOPR. Those deleted provisions address rate case procedural schedules, standards for discovery and data requests, and certain required disclosures. However, he also suggested that the Commission retain certain disclosures proposed in the NOPR in paragraph 3353, 4353D. So again, to facilitate the discussion this morning, we prepared a modified version of paragraph 3353, 4353D, reflecting Chair Blank's proposal. What we did is we cross-referenced that proposal to the joint utilities blue lines as referenced by the utility consumer advocate in its exceptions to the recommended decision. As we discussed last week, UCA seeks the full rule to be restored because the UCA notes that when the utilities filed their supplemental comments and blue line edits, they had made certain proposals, certain deletions, and certain additions to 3353, 4353. And in its exceptions, UCA asked the Commission to approve UCA's modifications to the joint utility supplemental comments. So that's the origin of the rule language that was circulated for your discussion and modification this morning.
I appreciate your working this up, Mr. Davis and the team, and would support it. Commissioner Gilman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant? I also agree. Does that give you what you need, Mr. Davis? And I think this has to be an ABC decision, given the timing.
Well, it doesn't have to be, but it does have to mail by probably Friday. Commission Counsel Harper has made great progress in the draft decision, and we could get it most likely to you by tomorrow morning if you want to see it.
I would prefer ABC on this one, Commissioner Gowen.
Yeah, I'm confident you can capture it.
Commissioner Plant, I agree. And thanks to you, Mr. Davis. I know this has been a 2-year journey that started off with you interviewing every party for months. So thanks for leading us through this. Appreciate it. Anything else, Commissioner Goman?
No, that's all.
Commissioner Plant? Nope. Thanks all. We're adjourned.